and was a Christmas she would never forget. Margaret spent years mocking her neighbor, but when her world fell apart, the same man she humiliated became her family's savior. What he did next left her speechless, and it will leave you inspired. Stay to see how one act of kindness changed everything. Comments below where you're watching from, and if you like and love our story, kindly subscribe our channel. Life, inspirational, and motivational tales that explore themes of love, unity, and patriotism. Stay with us always for interesting stories. Thanks. Let's start the story. The snow lay thick over the quiet suburban streets, muffling the world in a blanket of white. Christmas lights twinkled faintly from houses down the block, their glow reflecting the season's festive spirit. But inside one dimly lit home, the warmth of the holiday seemed distant, almost cruelly out of reach. Mary Thompson sat alone at her kitchen table, her head buried in her hands as tears fell onto an unopened pile of bills. Since her husband's untimely passing months ago, life had been a relentless storm of grief and hardship. Her once steady life was now a series of unanswered prayers and sleepless nights. Her son, Timmy, barely old enough to understand the weight of their struggles, had been denied admission to a private school Mary believed was his only shot at a brighter future. The ache of failing him was more than she could bear. Across the street, through the gently falling snow, another figure moved quietly. Thomas Brooks, her neighbor, watched from his porch, his breath visible in the cold air. Mary's harsh words and dismissive glares over the years might have kept others away, but not Thomas. With a quiet resolve, he made a decision that would change everything for Mary and teach her a lesson in kindness she would never forget. Snow blanketed the suburban neighborhood, its pristine white glow illuminating the festive lights adorning most homes. The streets were quiet, muffled by the fresh snowfall, as laughter and carols floated faintly from the houses alive with holiday cheer. But at the end of the cul-de-sac, one house stood dark and quiet, its windows dim and lifeless against the otherwise festive backdrop. Inside, Margaret Harper sat by the fireplace, though the flames had long since died out. Once proud and poised, Margaret now wore the weight of grief and exhaustion like a heavy cloak. Her husband's death earlier in the year had left her a single mother, fighting a losing battle against mounting debts. The house that once echoed with laughter now felt like a hollow shell, and the thought of Christmas only deepened her pain. Margaret's son, 8-year-old Timmy, was upstairs, oblivious to the financial burden crushing his mother. She had tried everything to secure his future, even applying to a prestigious private school. But the rejection had arrived earlier that day. She couldn't bear to tell Timmy that she had failed him, not just with the school, but with everything. Across the street, Daniel Hayes was shoveling his driveway, his breath fogging in the crisp night air. A tall, quiet man in his early 40s, Daniel was known around the neighborhood for his calm demeanor and willingness to lend a helping hand. But to Margaret, he was nothing more than a convenient target for her frustration and prejudice. Over the years, she had made snide remarks about Daniel's modest lifestyle and quiet existence, dismissing him with curt words or passive-aggressive glares. Daniel, however, had never responded with anything but polite nods and kind words. His composure was unshaken, even in the face of Margaret's thinly veiled insults. As Daniel glanced toward Margaret's house, he noticed her sitting alone, her shoulders hunched in a way that spoke of deep sorrow. It wasn't the first time he had seen her like this, but tonight, something about her quiet despair struck him differently. He turned back to his shoveling, but his thoughts lingered on the woman across the street. He had overheard the neighborhood gossip, how Margaret was struggling to make ends meet, how her son's private school dreams had been dashed, how her bills were piling up. She was a woman who had lost her footing, clinging to the edges of a life that no longer felt stable. Margaret wiped her tears as she stared at the stack of unopened bills on the table. Her heart ached at the thought of failing her son during Christmas, the one time of year she had always promised to make magical for him. She didn't notice Daniel watching from his porch, his eyes full of quiet determination. Daniel didn't need recognition or thanks. He didn't need Margaret to change her opinion of him. But as he turned back toward his own home, an idea began to take root. A plan to help his neighbor in ways she couldn't yet imagine. Margaret sat at the kitchen table, staring blankly at the letter in her hands. It was from her son's school. A final warning. If she didn't pay the overdue fees soon, Timmy would lose his place. The thought of her son being forced to leave school crushed her. She had promised him a better future, and now even that seemed to be slipping through her fingers. She had spent the last week tirelessly applying for jobs, each rejection hitting harder than the last. Employers either cited her lack of recent experience or simply didn't respond. Margaret's confidence, already fragile from months of financial strain, began to crumble entirely. Her nights were sleepless, her mind racing with thoughts of unpaid bills and unfulfilled promises. The once proud woman who had kept her head high now felt small and defeated. One cold evening, Margaret stepped into her backyard, hoping the fresh air might clear her mind. The sky was dark, and the faint twinkle of Christmas lights from the surrounding houses only deepened her sense of isolation. She sank onto a wooden bench, her hands trembling as she held her face, and began to cry softly. Daniel, walking past on his way home, heard the muffled sobs. He stopped at the edge of her yard, hesitating. Margaret had always kept him at a distance, her curt words and dismissive looks making it clear she didn't welcome his presence. But seeing her like this, so vulnerable, so unlike the woman who had once carried herself with such confidence, tugged at him. He stepped closer, calling out gently, "Margaret, are you all right?" Margaret looked up, startled. Seeing Daniel standing at the edge of her yard only deepened her frustration. Her pride, wounded and raw, flared up. Why do you care?" she snapped, her voice sharp and defensive. "Stay out of my business." Daniel stood still, unshaken by her tone. His gaze softened as he took in the scene, the stack of mail spilling onto the table inside the house, the shadows under her eyes, the broken look she tried to hide. He nodded slightly, his voice calm. "If you ever need anything, you know where to find me." Margaret turned away, her tears spilling over again. She didn't watch him leave, but his words lingered in the cold night air. Inside his own home, Daniel couldn't shake the image of Margaret's despair. Over the years, he had endured her cutting remarks and judgmental stares, but he had never wished ill upon her. He understood what it meant to struggle, to feel alone, and he couldn't ignore the pull to help her, even if she didn't want him to. The next morning, as he sipped his coffee, an idea began to take shape. He picked up his phone and called an old friend who ran a private school nearby. The two had worked together on community projects in the past, and Daniel trusted him completely. "I have a neighbor," Daniel began, his tone careful yet determined. "She's going through a tough time. Her son's education is at risk because of unpaid fees. Is there anything you can do to help?" His friend listened, understanding the urgency in Daniel's voice. "Let me see what I can do," he said. "I'll need some details, but we'll figure something out." Daniel hung up, feeling a glimmer of hope. He wasn't done yet. Picking up his phone again, he made another call, this time to his company's HR department. As a senior executive, he rarely got involved in hiring decisions, but this was different. "There's someone I'd like you to consider for an upcoming position," he said, describing Margaret's background and potential. "I'll forward her resume, schedule an interview without mentioning my involvement." The plan was in motion. Daniel didn't need recognition or thanks. He just wanted to make a difference. He knew Margaret might never fully understand why he was helping her, but that didn't matter. What mattered was giving her a chance to rebuild what she thought she had lost forever. In the days that followed, Margaret continued her job search, unaware of the opportunities quietly being arranged for her. Her despair remained, but faint glimmers of hope began to pierce through the darkness. Daniel, watching from a distance, felt a quiet sense of resolve. He didn't need to be a hero. He just wanted to do the right thing. The week had been unusually eventful for Margaret. First came the phone call from Timmy's school. Her hands shook as she answered, fearing more bad news. Instead, the principal's calm voice delivered a miracle. "Mrs. Harper, I wanted to inform you that your son's tuition has been fully covered by an anonymous sponsor. Timmy's enrollment is secure." Margaret froze, the words sinking in slowly. I don't understand. Who would do this?" The principal replied kindly. "The donor prefers to remain anonymous, but please know that your son's education is taken care of." Margaret's voice cracked with emotion. Thank you so much." As she hung up, a wave of relief washed over her, followed by confusion. Who would step forward to help her, especially in such a substantial way? Days later, Margaret received another unexpected call, this time from a company inviting her for a job interview. She hadn't even remembered applying to this particular firm, but desperation overruled hesitation. The morning of the interview, she dressed in her best professional attire, her nerves fraying with every passing minute. The interview went better than she could have imagined. The interviewer, warm and encouraging, seemed to appreciate her candidness and determination. "You're exactly what we're looking for," the interviewer concluded. "We'd like to offer you the position." Margaret accepted the offer on the spot, fighting the tears threatening to spill. Things were finally starting to turn around, and she couldn't help but feel as if some invisible hand was guiding her through the storm. On Christmas morning, Margaret sat with Timmy by the small tree they had decorated together. There were only a few modest presents, but for the first time in months, Margaret felt light, hopeful even. Timmy handed her an envelope addressed to her from the school principal. "This came yesterday, Mom," he said. "Can you read it?" She nodded. I can read, if only." Margaret opened it, curious. Inside was a handwritten note. "Dear Mrs. Harper, we wish you and Timmy a joyous holiday season. We would also like to take this opportunity to thank Mr. Daniel Hayes for his generosity in covering Timmy's tuition. His selflessness embodies the true spirit of Christmas." Margaret's heart stopped. She read the letter twice, her mind racing to process the revelation. Daniel? It couldn't be. The man she had insulted, ridiculed, and humiliated countless times, the man she had dismissed so callously, was the one who had saved her son's education. Her breath quickened as she clutched the letter. Memories of her cruel remarks came flooding back, each one a sharp pang of guilt. "Do you even have a real job?" she had sneered once. Another time she had mocked him in front of her friends, making snide comments about his appearance. And yet, he had chosen to help her without expecting anything in return. As the weight of her shame bore down on her, tears streamed down her face. She recalled every moment Daniel had shown her kindness, despite her hostility. Her heart ached with a mix of gratitude and regret. She needed to see him, to thank him, to apologize, to make things right. Without hesitation, Margaret bundled up, told Timmy she'd be back soon, and stepped into the crisp Christmas morning air. She walked quickly to Daniel's modest home, the snow crunching beneath her boots. Standing at his front door, she hesitated for a moment before knocking. When Daniel answered, his expression was one of quiet surprise. "Margaret," he said, his voice gentle. "Is everything all right?" Margaret held up the letter, her hands trembling. You did this," she said, her voice cracking. "You paid Timmy's tuition. And you got me that job, didn't you?" Daniel's face softened into a modest smile. "I just wanted to help," he said simply. "Ah." Margaret's emotions spilled over. "I don't deserve this. After everything I've said to you, the way I've treated you, I was so wrong about you. And I don't even know how to begin to apologize." Daniel stepped aside, motioning for her to come in. As she entered his warm, modest home, she wiped her tears, struggling to find the right words. "You've done more for me and Timmy than anyone else ever has," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "And I've treated you so horribly. I don't know how you can forgive me." Daniel poured her a cup of tea, his movements unhurried and calm. He sat across from her and said softly, "Margaret, life is too short to hold on to anger or grudges. What matters is how we treat each other in the moments that count. I saw someone in need, and I helped. That's all." Margaret broke down, her tears flowing freely. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for everything." Daniel reached out, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "You're welcome. And you don't owe me anything, Margaret. Just take care of Timmy and keep moving forward." Margaret gave him a half-smile as she stood in the same place as before and noticed for the first time how wonderful the room felt. As Margaret left Daniel's home, her heart felt lighter, though the weight of her past actions remained a constant reminder of the lesson she had learned. That Christmas, she vowed to live with kindness, to see people for who they truly were, and to let go of the prejudices that had blinded her for so long. Margaret paced nervously outside Daniel's modest home, clutching a small box wrapped in festive paper. Her breath fogged in the chilly Christmas air, and her heart raced. She had rehearsed what to say countless times, but the words felt inadequate. Gathering her courage, she knocked gently on the door. Moments later, Daniel opened it, his familiar, calm smile greeting her. "Margaret," he said warmly, "what brings you here?" He looked as if he had been falling in love with her for the past 3 months. Margaret's composure broke. Tears welled up in her eyes as she held out the gift. "I needed to see you," she began, her voice trembling, "to thank you and to apologize." Strange, it felt like least resistance, something as compromising as can be. Daniel stepped aside, inviting her in. She hesitated before stepping into his cozy home, decorated with simple but thoughtful touches of holiday cheer. A small tree glowed softly in the corner, and the scent of fresh coffee lingered in the air. Margaret turned to face him, struggling to contain her emotions. "I don't even know where to begin," she admitted. "For years, I judged you, insulted you, and treated you unfairly. And yet, you were the one who saved my son's future, who gave me a chance to stand on my feet again." Tears spilled freely as she continued. "You didn't have to do any of it, Daniel. I didn't deserve your kindness. But you've shown me what true compassion looks like, and I will never forget that." Daniel listened quietly, his kind eyes reflecting understanding rather than judgment. When she finished, he placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Margaret," he said softly, "it's Christmas. Forgiveness is the greatest gift we can give. I never held anything against you. We all have moments we're not proud of. What matters is that we learn from them." Margaret wiped her tears, a bittersweet smile forming on her face. "You're a better person than I could ever hope to be." Daniel chuckled lightly. "You're a good person too, Margaret. Life just has a way of teaching us lessons when we least expect it." As she left his home, Margaret felt a weight lift from her heart. The once stubborn, judgmental woman had been humbled by an act of pure generosity and grace. Her perspective had shifted entirely, and she vowed to carry this newfound understanding into every aspect of her life. In the weeks that followed, Margaret began sharing her story with her neighbors. She openly admitted her past mistakes and credited Daniel's kindness as the catalyst for her transformation. "He taught me what it truly means to care for one another," she told them. "We're all more alike than we think, and it's time we start acting like it." Margaret also became an advocate for kindness in the community, organizing food drives and volunteering at local shelters. Her relationship with Daniel grew into one of mutual respect and friendship. The woman who once saw the world through a lens of prejudice now viewed it with hope and understanding. On Christmas evening, the neighborhood came together for a small celebration. Laughter and chatter filled the air as children played, their joy contagious. Margaret sat beside Daniel, a cup of warm cider in her hands. She watched as her son ran across the yard, his face glowing with happiness. Turning to Daniel, she smiled. "You've taught me the true meaning of Christmas," she said sincerely. "Thank you for everything. For saving Timmy's future, for helping me when I didn't deserve it, and for showing me what kindness truly looks like." They walked to Mr. Maddox's desk and waited as Tim looked at the papers before him. The system took paper machines away. Daniel raised his cup in a small toast. "Merry Christmas, Margaret, and remember, it's never too late to change." As the festivities carried on, Margaret reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The man she had once judged so harshly had become her greatest teacher, proving that kindness and forgiveness hold the power to heal even the deepest wounds. The snow began to fall softly, blanketing the neighborhood in a serene glow. Margaret smiled as she thought to herself, "This Christmas, I learned that the greatest gifts are not the ones we receive, but the ones we give. And sometimes, The people we least expect can teach us the most profound lessons. Margaret's journey is one that resonates deeply with the universal truths we all encounter: judgment, regret, and the potential for redemption. Her transformation from a woman consumed by prejudice to someone who embraces kindness and understanding reflects the power of humility and second chances. Daniel's quiet strength and unwavering compassion remind us that true heroes are often those who act without seeking recognition, showing us the path to forgiveness through their own actions. As the story unfolds, viewers are drawn into Margaret's struggles, feeling the weight of her guilt and the beauty of her growth. Daniel's grace and selflessness strike a chord, inspiring hope and reinforcing the idea that kindness is a ripple that can spark change in even the most unexpected places. What about you? Have you ever faced a moment where you judged someone unfairly, or perhaps experienced the transformative power of forgiveness? Share your stories in the comments below. Let's create a space of reflection and kindness. In the words of Nature Mays and her ancestors, the longest gone, the shortest present. If this story moved you, show your support by liking, sharing, and subscribing to our channel. Together we can inspire change, one story at a time.